For almost 800 years, people walked underneath a ship without knowing it. Not a model, not a painting of a ship, a real medieval ship. And it had been hiding inside the ceiling of a building in the German city of Constance. The strangest part? People had been looking at those wooden planks for centuries. They just thought they were a ceiling. Then archaeologists took a closer look. They noticed the wooden pegs, the nails, the way the planks were connected, and suddenly, the pieces started making sense. This wasn't ordinary building timber. It was part of a ship's hull, and not just a few random pieces. Researchers identified at least 19 massive planks belonging to a remarkably large continuous section of the hull. So how did a ship end up in a ceiling? To understand that, we have to go back to the ship's first life. Constance sits on Lake Constance, an important waterway in Central Europe. And hundreds of years ago, boats were essential for moving people and goods around the lake. This particular vessel appears to have been a flat-bottomed cargo ship. It wasn't built to look beautiful. It was built to work, carry cargo, travel across the lake, and keep going. But here's the fascinating part. The ship had been repaired. Researchers have found evidence of at least 4 separate repairs to the hull. Damaged pieces were removed, and new pieces were carefully fitted into their place. One repair is particularly unusual. The replacement piece has a shape almost like a swallow's tail. And researchers haven't yet found a clear match for this exact repair technique among other known medieval ships from the region. So this wasn't some brand new boat that was used once and abandoned. Someone had invested time and effort into keeping it alive. It had a working life. It carried cargo. It was damaged. It was repaired. And eventually, the ship reached the end of its life on the water. But that's where the story takes a completely unexpected turn. The ship didn't disappear. It became a building. In the Middle Ages, good wood was valuable. So when an old ship was no longer useful as a vessel, its timber could be given a second life. And that's apparently what happened here. The ship was dismantled, its wooden pieces were taken apart, and reused in a building. But this is what makes the discovery so extraordinary. A surprisingly large part of the hull stayed together. At least 19 planks were reused, and some of them still have relationships to each other that reveal how they were originally arranged in the ship. Even traces of the material used to seal the gaps between the planks have survived. Think about what that means. A ship that once moved across a lake was taken apart, carried into a building, and turned into part of a ceiling. Its first life was over, but its second life had just begun. And for centuries, its second life went completely unnoticed, until archaeologists looked closer. That's where this discovery becomes more than just a strange story. Because medieval ships are incredibly difficult to study. Most don't survive. Wood rots, ships sink, buildings are destroyed. And even when archaeologists find pieces of an old vessel, they often have only fragments to work with. But this ship is different. It spent centuries inside a building, protected from the water, protected from many of the conditions that normally destroy ancient wood. And that means researchers can examine details that might otherwise have been lost forever. The shape of the planks, the wooden fasteners, the repairs, the way the pieces were connected, even the old caulking between the boards. Together, those details can tell researchers how medieval shipbuilders actually constructed their vessels. But there's still a mystery. Exactly when was this ship built? How long did it sail? Where was it built? And perhaps the most interesting question, what happened to it before it became a ceiling? Researchers are now trying to answer those questions. They've been documenting the surviving timber in incredible detail. Hundreds of overlapping photographs can be combined to create a 3-dimensional digital model of the ship's remains. And scientists are also studying samples of the wood. One important technique is called dendrochronology. Basically, researchers examine the tree rings in the wood. Those rings can help determine when the tree was growing, and potentially when it was cut down. That could give researchers a much better idea of when this mysterious ship was built. But until those investigations are complete, part of the story remains hidden. And maybe that's fitting, because this entire discovery is about something being hidden in plain sight. For centuries, people saw those wooden planks and saw a ceiling. Archaeologists looked at the same planks and saw a ship that had carried goods, a ship that had been repaired, a ship that had eventually stopped sailing. And instead of being thrown away, it became part of a building. And that tells us something surprisingly important about the medieval world. We often imagine the past as a place where people simply used things until they were useless. But wood was valuable. A ship might stop being useful as a ship, without becoming useless altogether. Its materials could be reused. Its timber could become something else. Boat to building, transport to architecture. One object, two completely different lives. And strangely enough, the second life is the reason we can study the first one today. Because if someone had simply abandoned the ship, the wood might have disappeared. Instead, someone needed building material, so they dismantled an old vessel and gave its timber another job. They needed a ceiling, and completely by accident. They preserved a ship for almost 800 years, so think about that the next time you walk through an old building. You might be looking at a wall, a floor, a beam, a ceiling. But what if it used to be something completely different? Because for centuries, people in Constance looked up and saw a ceiling. They had no idea they were standing underneath the remains of a medieval ship, and the ship didn't survive because someone knew it was historically important. It survived because someone needed its wood, and nearly 8 centuries later, someone finally looked twice. If you love stories where ordinary objects turn out to hide extraordinary histories, subscribe.